Joe Biden's recent actions have made some people really worried. At a news event in Hanoi last year, the 81-year-old president was stopped by his team during a speech that was hard to follow. He oddly called people who don't believe in climate change lying dog-faced pony soldiers, and seemed to mix up the movie Good Morning Vietnam with a song. Back in 1973, American doctors who specialise in the mind agreed to a rule called the Gold Water Rule. This means they shouldn't guess or give opinions about someone's mental health if they haven't met and checked that person themselves. This rule came about after a lot of them said Barry Goldwater, who was running for president in 1964, wasn't fit for the job. Since then, reporters and others have been careful not to make wild guesses about the mental health of politicians. However, with Biden, there are clear moments that raise eyebrows. For instance, on the day of the Nashville school shooting in March of last year, he commented, "I came down because I heard there was chocolate chip ice cream." Then in June 2023, after finishing a speech in Connecticut, he unexpectedly said, "God save the Queen, man." That same month, he mistakenly mentioned that Vladimir Putin is clearly losing the war in Iraq, and talked about plans to build a railroad from the Pacific all the way across the Indian Ocean. We've all seen him slipping and falling down the stairs countless times. In his book, The Last Politician, Inside Joe Biden's White House and the Struggle for America's Future, Franklin Foer discusses how by the end of 2022, Biden's age was becoming a noticeable challenge. It affected his energy levels and his ability to maintain a strong public image or remember names easily. Foer notes that Biden's public appearance showed signs of physical and mental decline, something that no treatment or exercise could completely prevent. Privately, Biden sometimes told friends that he felt tired. The issue with Biden's mental state isn't just a private concern. As the leader of a superpower, his role comes with huge responsibilities. Any mental challenges he faces have significant implications, not just for him personally, but also on a global scale. This situation puts Biden's party in a tough spot, especially as the 2024 presidential election approaches. There's a growing conversation about whether he's up to the challenge of another demanding campaign, particularly a potential rematch with Donald Trump. It's a fact that the former Republican president, who's 77, often makes nonsensical statements in his public speeches. However, he does it with a lot of energy. Polls show that people are less worried about his age compared to how they feel about Biden's. If Biden's chosen to run for a second term, the Democrats face tough choices. According to the 25th Amendment of the US Constitution, Vice President Kamala Harris and a majority of the cabinet have the power to remove Biden from office if they believe that he can't fulfill his presidential duties. In recent interviews, Harris has hinted that she might need to step in and has expressed her readiness for such a scenario. However, forcibly removing Biden would set a new constitutional precedent, especially as the country is still dealing with the aftermath of 91 criminal charges against Trump. It's a possibility, but it's barely conceivable. The list of possible alternatives to Biden within the Democratic Party doesn't look very promising. Vice President Kamala Harris, California Governor Gavin Newsom, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and the controversial figure Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who opposes vaccines, might not pose as strong a challenge to Trump as Biden, who's already defeated Trump in the 2020 election. The Democratic Party is also wary because of what happened in 1968. That year, President Lyndon Johnson decided not to run for a second term after Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated. The Democratic nominee, Hubert Humphrey, lost to Richard Nixon. Biden's team are hoping for two things. First, that Biden's health won't decline further and that he'll manage to get through the upcoming campaign. And second, that despite polls showing a tight race between Biden and Trump, independent and minority voters will end up supporting the Democratic candidate on election day. Thinking about Biden's age made us compare it to the ages of past US presidents. When Biden became president in January 2021 at 78, he was the oldest person ever elected to the job, and he's the first to be in office after turning 80. Before him, Donald Trump was the next oldest, starting his term at 70, while Ronald Reagan was 68. On average, presidents have been around 55 years old when they start their term. But there's more to this. Since 1850, which is when we start having reliable data on how long people lived, presidents have often been older than the average man's life expectancy by the time they left office. For example, James Buchanan was nearly 30 years older than the average man when he left office in 1861. Even Theodore Roosevelt, who was the youngest to become president, was a year older than the life expectancy for men when he finished his term. It wasn't until Calvin Coolidge left office in 1929 that the president was younger than the average lifespan of men. Nowadays, it's pretty common for American presidents to be younger than the average lifespan for men when they leave office. This trend has been true for all presidents since Dwight Eisenhower, except for Ronald Reagan. Barack Obama stands out because when he left office at 56, he was 29% younger than the average man. Especially notable since men's life expectancy was at its highest in 2017, though it's dropped a bit since then. If President Biden finishes a second term, he'd leave office at age 87, which is about 7 years above the average. On the other hand, if Donald Trump were to become president again, he would be 83 when his term ended. When we think about President Biden possibly getting re-elected, he's going to be much older than what we're used to for a president. At the end of the day, it's really up to the people voting to decide what they think about that. There's talk about whether we should make rules about how old you can be to hold public office, but that idea doesn't sit well with everyone. It would be nice if older leaders decided on their own to make room for younger ones, kind of like Senator Mitt Romney, 76, who said he's not going to run for office again in 2025 because he thinks it's time for younger people to take over. He even said it's time for people like me to step back when he was talking to the news people in September. The numbers tell us that people in the US are living a lot longer these days. In 2021, there were nearly 90,000 people who were 100 or older, which is a lot more than there were 20 years ago. Not just that, but older folks are staying healthier for longer too. This means they can keep doing things and stay active even when they're older. Sometimes older people start feeling like they don't have as much of a reason to get up in the morning, and that could be why some politicians stay in their jobs for a really long time. It's like they find a reason to keep going because of their jobs, they don't want to give that up. This leaves Americans with a stark choice: a candidate who could be facing significant legal troubles, and another whose psychological well-being and ability to communicate effectively is in question. Between potential criminality and clear signs of age-related decline, this situation suggests a deep crisis for the American political system.